Welcome to part 5 of my creative life journey. Sorry, this is going on a bit, but that's the way it is. I left you last time. I had left art college and gone away for the summer, and I decided to come back to Cambridge. I was a mess. For all those people who knew me in my 20s who might come across this, I can only apologise for being the person that I was at the time. We're talking about a creative journey, and I suppose all that personal psychological stuff is a huge part of it, but I'm not going to go into all that. But there was a lot going on, shall I say. I do wonder sometimes when I look back at that period. I had a rather nasty bicycle accident. Now, Cambridge is famous for everybody going around on bicycles because it's so flat. I had just been shopping on my way home, zooming around the corner, and another bicycle just drifts in front of me, just across the road. And there was this moment we kind of looked at each other and I thought, you cannot be serious. You're just going across the road. And bang, and I went over the handlebars. I hit my head. And I was furious with this person. Just got my chain back on the bike, cycled back home again. And did what you're not meant to do. Was I went to bed. I was obviously concussed. And somehow went to a party that evening where I think I argued with everybody. And I think I had possibly a bit of a personality change thanks to that accident. So anyway, I find myself in Cambridge trying to be a professional illustrator and taking on anything. I had not resolved my style or anything, or I still had this thing in me from having been working in printing that, you got to deliver to the customer. I was quite good at copying other people's styles, and I did get work. Not terribly good work. I remember I used to work for the Dungeons and Dragons magazine, who were in Cambridge in those days, and they would call me up, so at the end of the day, say, "Oh, we need an illustration. Can you do this by the morning?" And so I'd be up all night drawing dragons attacking a Roman fort or something like that. And but it sort of kept me going, I think. In the meantime, I was trying to become a children's author illustrator. And I had made a picture book called The Problem with Strawberry Jam Pancakes, which was and I had my niece, I based the character very much on my niece. And there was stuff going on in the background. I'll see if I can put it in and find some pictures while I'm editing this. So stuff going on in my background, in my life, was kind of all involved in the illustrations. And I was trying to do some kind of weird technical things to it. But anyway, I got my portfolio and I found all these addresses of children's publishers and went off to see them. And they all kind of went, "Thank you very much, thank you very much," because they knew I hadn't really got it. And then I went to see Ernest Benn, very old publishers, and they were not in London, unusually. They were on the other side of London in a place called Tunbridge, and I think they were quite pleased somebody had actually come out that far to see them. And it was Paul and Helen, who were absolutely lovely, and I don't know, they obviously saw something in me, and suddenly I had a contract to do this book. It was fabulous. And as soon as, and they said, "Right, go away and do the finished artwork." And as soon as they said that, I just tightened up. And this is a very common thing, I think, with illustrators. And they went, "No, this isn't right, this isn't right." So I delivered the book, and they went, "No, no, no." And eventually Paul came up to Cambridge for a day, and he just sat there. I made him cups of tea, and he just sat there. He said, "Try this." And I'd sit there and paint something. "Yeah, that's like that." And then he'd sit there and drink another cup of tea while I tried something else. And he kept sort of pointing me in directions and everything. He just wanted me to loosen up, because my original kind of sketches that I'd shown him were really quite loose, and as soon as I start illustrating, it all tightens up again. And what he'd seen was this kind of loose style, which I just couldn't let myself do that. It seemed unprofessional to be too loose. So that was going on and on and on and on, and it never got published. And in the meantime, also then I used to go and stay with my brother a lot. His second child, Lydia, this tiny little house. So I was sleeping on the floor, on a mattress on the floor, and in the middle of the night, Lydia would wake up. She was teething, so I'd sort of take her downstairs and give her a cup of tea and Calpol medicine to help, paracetamol. And I would tell her stories. And these stories began to grow. And they were stories about what happened during the day. And I would take her and her sister out for walks to feed the ducks, look at the river, that kind of thing. And so these kind of boring kind of everyday stories turned into these Lydia stories, and I became the mum, so it became Lydia and her mum. And I made these little books, and I took them to Helen and Paul, and they went, "Oh, this is lovely," and so they started working on them, and took them off to the Bologna Children's Book Fair and things, and they came back and said, it's just not right, oh, can't get this right. And they worked on it, and eventually decided, sorry, we can't get this to work. And in the meantime, there was the whole strawberry jam pancakes debacle going on. I think I illustrated that book 3 times in the end fully, and never quite right. And then suddenly I was going to be a rock and roll star. Where did that come from? So, I'd always been sort of playing guitars and stuff like that. And then my friend said, come and sing. And he said, I'm sort of working with this band, and we're kind of building up a band, and it's very serious. And so we went off and met the other guys. And it was a serious, proper band with serious aims and ambitions. And, everything I'd ever been in before and sort of mucked about with was just kind of, lads, and Marius, who's my friend, he was like a serious musician, very serious, a proper musician. And he wanted me to sing for them. And so that's what happened. And then it's all reached a point, and we needed some management or something to happen. And my old school friend, Simon, he had ended up in rock and roll business, in rock and roll lighting. He used to do lighting for Prince and everybody, lots of heavy metal stuff. And I just sort of got back in touch with them, and I've been doing. See, this is another thing. I'm doing any kind of work. I'd gone up to Birmingham to the big exhibition centre, the National Exhibition Centre there, and I was doing cartoons for an electrical company. I was sat there drawing cartoon pictures of the electrical contractors that they work with every day, and I was just drawing these people all day long, and it was days before their faces would just stop appearing in my head. It was really weird. But I got back in touch with Simon and his whole thing that he was doing at the time, and the couple of bands that he was managing and things, and it was all very exciting. And then I sent him our tape. And he said, "Oh, mate, come on, come and see us." So I went off for the weekend, and before I knew what was happening, we were in Status Quo tour bus, trundling down to Glastonbury for the weekend. So we were backstage at Glastonbury talking about, "Oh yeah, I love your music," and everyone was going, "Oh yeah, we love your music." Oh God, Glastonbury. So I was sort of up on the stage with one of the lighting guys who I kind of bonded with, and he was like doing all the lights, and looking down from the stage to this mass of people. God, they're horrible. I don't want anything to do with them. But I love the music that was going on the stage, and then we didn't have enough tickets for people to go out, so I never actually went out into Glastonbury. I stayed in this little compound for backstage because it was just and everyone that went out, they all sort of came back smashed on magic mushrooms and stuff. Oh God. Anyway, so Simon then said, yeah, we're going to manage you. And anyway, so we all moved up to Birmingham. So he was managing UFO at the time, who you might have heard of, and a band called Tobruk. So he said, "Oh, I'm busy with them. Just keep writing." So we went off to the UB40 studios and just kind of moved in for a while and just sat there writing, and then so we just did lots of writing and stuff, and we slowly started sort of pulling apart. I think the big problem was that the other guys smoked dope and I didn't. I drank alcohol. Alcohol and dope don't mix, because dope, they just want to... and alcohol wants to get going. I found this sort of alternative group of sort of people to hang out with at the Duck on Hagley Road. And they're all kind of pop sort of music kind of guys. And we would meet up just before closing time. We'd sort of about an hour before closing time. I can't remember what time it is. So we would go down at meet about 10 o'clock at night or something like that. So there was only time to have sort of a pint of beer or maybe two, and we would all kind of chat, and then and I sort of got into going out to nightclubs with all that lot, while the rest of the band were back smoking dope, and we started pulling apart. Basically, it's a real shame. And then we did this sort of amazing video. So they were going to come and sell us to. Then we did this amazing video to sell us to the record labels. Basically, everything was falling apart around us, and Simon was having a bit of trouble with cocaine. So he kind of disappeared off to dry out, and there was all sorts of stuff going on. We did one gig, so we did this final gig in Wolverhampton. There weren't many people there, and it was quite fun. But that was it. There was something about it. We just knew it was all over. The other three saying, "We're going to London. You coming with us?" And I said, "No, I'm not." I just packed everything up. And the guy who'd been doing the lights at Glastonbury, he offered to drive me and all my stuff. He drove me off to my mum's in Wild West Wales, in this tiny little village, which is everything that wasn't rock and roll, and probably a really good thing and a good place for me to be. It's a very tiny village where most people speak Welsh, for one thing. I got there and was sort of humbled by the fact that I was English and I didn't speak Welsh. So I kind of shut up a bit. The grief of splitting up in the band was... Grief is the only word for it. And all I could do was determine to work and to sort myself out and to become a children's book illustrator. I wasn't really thinking of being an author. Just before I'd moved, there had been one terrible, terrible night when I had drunk far too much. It was just a terrible night, and I suppose you have to hit rock bottom to be able to start climbing up, don't you? And I think at the time I realised I have a really bad relationship to red wine, and determined never to drink wine again. And in fact, it was such a terrible night. Just the smell of wine, across the room, I can't cope with that. And I really don't like wine. And I kind of moderated my drinking. I talked before about having read about manic depression and kind of thought, oh, that kind of chimes with me. And I would kind of go shooting up with incredible enthusiasms and then boing down to the bottom. And I realised at this time that the higher I went in enthusiasm, then the lower I would sort of drop on the other side into kind of depression, basically, and determined not to allow myself to go too high. Up until then, I'd had this thing about being an artist, and it's all from that bohemian kind of, you've got to give yourself to art and everything and live in garrets and starve and all that sort of thing. And I decided, no, you don't have to do that. You can just kind of be yourself and get on with it. You don't have to live this chaotic life. Began learning to not be chaotic, which is easier said than done when, you've been sort of hurling yourself around. I'd like to say I got up every morning and it's 7 o'clock and work, but I didn't. My mum would eventually come and wake me up, bless her heart, with a cup of tea and toast at whatever time. I think she kind of felt, 11 o'clock was late enough, in case somebody phoned. She didn't want to say, sorry, he's still asleep. And then I would sort of get up and then I would work. But I sort of carried on working till 2 or 3 in the morning, which is the problem, because that's why I was waking up late. And I later discovered that's all about coffee, So once I converted to decaf in the evenings, I actually went to sleep. I just worked and worked and worked, and analytically. And every time I did a piece of artwork, I would look at it and think, is that me? Is that something that I want to do for the rest of my life? And I go, no. And then I go, oh, I like that. And I put that to one side. And eventually I had this body of work. I think it was about 10 pages in my folder, probably only about 10, 11 pieces of work. I think. But they were consistent. That was the thing about them. I felt that I could go and sell myself as an illustrator, saying this is what I do. I then got all these appointments in London and got on the train, very long journey, and started going around to publishers who I had previously been to before I was a rock star. And it was amazing. They just treated me totally differently. Whereas before it was right, yeah, okay, thank you very much, and they would maybe send me a bit of work if they were desperate and nobody else wanted to do it. Now it was suddenly, oh right, okay, would you like a cup of coffee and a chat? And they would chat and they would talk about, what I was up to, what my plans were, and what I was thinking. But there were two things, I think. Those little books that I had done about Lydia, I had with me, and I was going to take them to show one particular publisher. But on the way to London, I made an appointment to see Oxford University Press. And so I went into them and I showed them my work. And I don't know, about 3 or 4 editors came in from different departments to have a look. And they all went, ooh, and then they found these little books that I had made up. And they went, oh, tell us about these. And so I said, well, I'm showing them to a publisher tomorrow. Oh, okay. One of them said, can I just take these away for 5 minutes? I want to show them to somebody. So off she went. And then other people started turning up and all looking at these little books and everything. And they said, this is kind of top secret, but we're just about to launch this huge, great reading scheme called the Oxford Reading Tree. And we are looking for books exactly like this to run alongside the scheme. And would you consider letting us publishing them? And I said, well, I promised to show them to somebody tomorrow, but, I'll get back to you. They said, well, So I went. So the next day, the person wasn't terribly interested at all. So I went back to it and said to Oxford University Press, are you still in? Yes, they said. And suddenly these books that had been a problem for my other publisher had found exactly the right place. And also I discovered, when I was getting them ready, that they had ripped out my text and rewritten them and put them in with typewriter kind of stuff. In a way, stories that I just didn't like what they'd done to them, which is why they hadn't sold them at Bologna Book Fair. And so Oxford University Press actually liked the stories that I wrote for these things. And they said, it's really difficult to write these books. And there was only one sentence on each page, 14 pages in the book, tiny little stories. And I just thought that's kind of how you started, and you kind of learn to write longer and longer books. But in fact, it's a bit of an art being able to write such a short book. In the meantime, ANC Black, who I hadn't published Strawberry Jam Pancakes with, asked me to do one page of a book called The Great Games Book. And so I did a game. I can't actually remember what it was. So there were lots of different board games. So it was a book, and each page was a board game done by a different artist, basically. and it did really well. So when I eventually went to see Blackie, who were an old and revered children's publisher, dear Philippa Mills Smith, who was a young, bouncing editor, kind of looked through my work. "Oh," she said when I showed her this thing, "oh, could you do more games like that?" So I said, "Oh, I should think so." She said, "Well, what about a book of games?" So I went off and kind of thought about that and put together a whole book of my own called Gruesome Games. So they're all kind of sort of Halloween themey kind of games. And so that got published. It did quite well. And then we followed up with games from the 21st century, because this was back in the 20th century. And so they were all kind of, sort of set in space and things like that. And then one day she said, no, we're having like, publishers. In those days, it was wonderful. You'd go to a publisher, you would meet at 12, come along, and go off to a restaurant, and you'd be drinking, eating, chatting till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then a gentle amble back to the office, and you'd got an idea for a book and almost a contract, and contracts would just come the next day in those days. When you got a really good idea and they liked it, they'd just send you a contract the next day. And Philippa, one day at lunch, she said to me, you're a storyteller. You should be writing stories. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, you're just telling stories all the time while we're eating. So, have you tried really writing something? So I said, She said, well, look, we've got this little series we're trying, and it's called Town and Country. She said, I commissioned 2 little books. I don't know, they're about 48 pages. She said, I've commissioned the 2 town stories. Now, you live out in the country. Can you write me 2 country stories? So I said, well, I'll try. And on the way home, on the train, I was looking out and I saw a field of sheep and the farmer in the field and a Land Rover, the vehicle. And something said to me, Land Rover, Lamb Drover. Oh, Lamb Drover is like a shepherd. And so it just came into my head, Lamb Drover Jim, the champion sheepdog. Because where I was living now out in Wales, there were sheepdog trials going on in the field next to our house and stuff going on. And the river had dried up the year before. All the sheep came down from the hills into the village. Chaos. So I just wrote that kind of story. And I wrote another story about going to market. And because my mum and I, we would drive into the market every Wednesday. I would go to the library, change my books. It was very old-fashioned country lifestyle. I wrote about Victoria, the Wednesday market bus, picking people up and adding trailers on and going to market. And she loved them, and I illustrated them, and suddenly I was sort of an author. And she really tucked me under her wing. And then she moved off to Puffin, run by Penguin Books. And so she kind of took me over there, and I started doing stuff for her there. And I suppose that takes me, I was starting to get there. And this is around about the time that I met up with my now wife again. So we had known each other since we were 13, 14 or something. And I think I first went out with her when I was 14. Teenage years, we were on and off. And then she went off to be a nurse, and we kind of lost touch. And then friends said, we've got her address. So I phoned her up, and it was, hello. So I went off to see her, to meet her in London after work. And she seemed to be totally sorted. She's got her life sorted in London. And I thought she was, now, I don't think Friends had actually started, but it was almost like she sort of was living a life like Friends, and she got all her friends and a kind of a lifestyle, and it was completely sorted. And so I eventually came back home to my mum. She said, how did that go? Because she obviously knew that there was a thing from way, way back. And I said, oh, she's completely sorted. A few days later, she phoned up and said, oh, you said I could come and see you in Wales. I said, yes. Didn't think she would. So she came that Friday, sort of arrived about 10 o'clock at night, having driven all the way up from London. And then by 4 o'clock the next day, we were engaged to be married. I think that's kind of when... See, I'm relaxing now. And that's kind of when things turned around and I really knuckled down and became a full-time kind of author and illustrator. But I think that's probably quite enough for this episode. There's got to be at least one more. And I'll see you then. Thanks for watching. Make sure you'll subscribe so you know what happens next. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.